Good evening, brethren.
Good evening.
My subject for tonight, Sir Robert Moray, soldier, scientist, spy, Freemason, and founder of the Royal Society. Well, the story starts back in the 17th century, at the time of the Civil War. And this was really quite a traumatic period for Britain. It was a row basically between Parliament, represented by Oliver Cromwell, and the King. At the end of the day, the King lost his head over it. But it's also the time when magic died and science was born. And that's what I really want to talk about. It's a really very strange thing to happen. I'm going to share with you a controversial thought here. This was a politically inspired Masonic plot. The Royal Society was created by a revolutionary, mercenary, spying Freemason. And I will justify those statements about him in a moment. He made use of secret Masonic groups, and he brought them together to support a government which had run out of money. It's a real, lovely Masonic conspiracy theory for you. This secret plan was sprung on the 28th of November 1660 at Gresham College. And that's Gresham College as it was in those days. And it was done at a lecture given by an astrologer called Christopher Wren, who you may have heard of. The conspirator, who I'm going to tell you a little bit about this evening, invited 11 other men to this lecture that Christopher Wren gave. These are the men he invited. And watch the pattern as it starts to develop. The first one was the Right Reverend John Wilkin. He had been warden of Wadham College. He'd also married Oliver Cromwell's sister, Robina. He had then moved on to become Master of Trinity College, Cambridge. At the time that this happened, he was down and out. He'd been thrown out of his role as Master of Trinity College. He'd been thrown out of his role at Wadham College, and he had no role left whatsoever. In fact, he was preaching for coppers in Gray's Inn Road, bunking with one of his old mates, who I'll tell you a bit about later. His payoff for this was that he became Bishop of Chester. But that's another story. We'll get to that later. He was a parliamentarian. We've got Viscount William Brooke now. He was a courtier to Charles I. He hid during Cromwell's role. He signed the Declaration of 1660 that brought the king back. And he bought Charles a yacht, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later. And he became the first president of the Royal Society. He was a Royalist. Robert Boyle was a parliamentarian. He's the one behind the famous Boyle's Law, which you may have heard of, and the General Gas Law. PV over T equals a constant, for those of you who understand gas. He was an Irishman. He wrote a lot of theology. He was a student of Wilkins at Wadham College, and he was also an inspired physicist who discovered the whole process behind the behaviour of compressed gases. We've now got another Royalist. You noticing the pattern here? This is in the aftermath of a major civil war. It's been going on for years. The king had been beheaded. Brothers had been fighting each other. Fathers had been fighting sons. The whole country had been torn up. And here are the two sides coming together. We've got another Royalist here, Alexander Bruce, 2nd Earl of Kincardine. He was a son of the mining engineer Sir George Bruce, who made a fortune out of coal and pumping the seawater out of his undersea mine, evaporating it and selling the salt. His father had been made an Earl by Charles I. He'd been exiled in Europe during the Civil War, and he came back to London with Charles II at the Restoration. Then we've got Dr. Jonathan Goddard. Now, he's a parliamentarian. He was a graduate of Cambridge, warden of Merton College, professor of physics at Gresham College, and he'd been Oliver Cromwell's personal physician. And he'd been dismissed from his post at Oxford by Charles II at the Restoration for being too close to Oliver Cromwell. Then we've got Sir Paul Neile. He was a courtier of Charles I. He'd hid out in Maidenhead during Cromwell's rule. He was very good at making lenses. And he went on John Wilkins' honeymoon with Robina Cromwell, which is quite a strange story. Yes, and they spent the whole time talking about grinding lenses. And he gave Wren a telescope. It's all in Evelyn's diary, read it. He gave Wren a telescope when he became Professor of Astronomy at Gresham College. Now we've got another parliamentarian, William Petty. He invented national statistics. He was a professor of anatomy at Brasenose College, Oxford, and a professor of music at Gresham. He was physician to Cromwell's Irish campaign, and he carried out the Down Survey, which established the list of ownership of all the properties in Ireland. And I think it's still the basis for the use of title even today. And he was thrown out of Oxford by Charles II when he came back following the Restoration. There's a pattern developing here. Now we've got William Boyle. William Boyle was a Royalist. He was an amethyst scientist. He worked with John Wallis and with Huygens, the man who discovered how lenses work. And he'd been exiled in Holland during the Civil War. He was a strong supporter of the king, and he became the first treasurer of the Royal Society. Then we've got Professor Lawrence Rooke. He studied under Wilkins and Seth Ward. Seth Ward, you'll remember, is the man who invented algebra. We'll come to him later. And he was Professor of Astronomy at Gresham before Wren was made Professor. He was then promoted to Professor of Geometry, and he made the opening for Wren to become Professor of Astronomy. He hosted the meeting on the 28th of November at Gresham to introduce Wren to the college. He was very interested in the problem of longitude. He did actually come up with a very sensible way of doing it, which involved using the shadows on the moon. And providing you had a clear night and a model of the moon where you understood it, could work quite well. It was eventually superseded by Harrison's watches. We've got Christopher Wren, another parliamentarian, but he was son of the Royalist Dean of Windsor. And he'd become a supporter of Parliament when he moved to Wadham to study under John Wilkins. He was the new Professor of Astronomy at Gresham College, and he gave the lecture. And we finally got Abraham Hill. Now, he doesn't appear to have been either a Royalist or a Parliamentarian. You notice we've had an even mix of Royalists and Parliamentarians meeting at a lecture to discuss the hidden mysteries of nature and science, if you believe it. Hill was 26 years old, and his big virtue was he was rich. He had lots of money, and he was prepared to spend it supporting the new Royal Society. And that seems to be his only virtue. Now, there's only one other founder who was there at that first meeting, and he's the conspirator who brought this lot together. And he's Sir Robert Moray. He was born in 1609 in Perthshire, son of Mungo Moray. He was inspired by George Bruce's coal mine to become an engineer, and he went on to study engineering at St Andrews University. There's no pictures of him, but that's his signature with his Mason's mark appended to it. That's all we have of him, I'm afraid. Now, let's look at his early career before he became a Mason. In 1633, he joined the Scots Guard of Louis XIII of France. He was picked out by Cardinal Richelieu as a potential to become a spy and basically a troublemaker. So he became a fifth columnist in Scotland, working for Richelieu, and he joined the Covenanters' army and marched down to Newcastle with them and was responsible for the fortifications at Newcastle. His role basically was to cause as much trouble as he possibly could for the Stuart kings. When he was in Newcastle, he was made a Mason. He's the first Mason that we know that we've got a record of being made on English soil. On the 20th of May, 1641, Murray was made a Freemason whilst he was garrisoned at Newcastle. And it wasn't an operative lodge. His initiation was carried out by General Alexander Hamilton and John Mill. John Mill was the King's Chief Mason, superseded Shaw, and Hamilton was in charge of the garrison there. They initiated Robert Moray into Freemasonry on a travelling warrant from the Lodge of Edinburgh. So he was the first Mason made on English soil, 20th of May 1641. A good 4 years before Elias Ashmole entered the Lodge of Lights in Warrington. There's the minute of Murray's initiation, which is stored at George Street in Edinburgh.